Is it visible?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, yeah, great. All right, so good morning, afternoon and evening to everybody. So as Amir has mentioned, the first part of today's seminar is going to focus on field testing and phenotyping, which we all know is a critical component of any breeding pipeline. And so today, myself and my colleague Jamlick Mwathi, we will take you through a couple of high-level concepts and philosophies around field testing. And before we actually get stuck into that, we just like to introduce ourselves. So my name is Sanesh Ramburan. I'm currently the phenotyping lead for Africa for Bayer Crop Science, part of the breeding organization. I'm based in South Africa at our Petite breeding station. And much of my work and my experience has really been focused on multi-environment testing in the context of breeding pipelines and agronomy, with experience in crops like wheat, barley, oats, maize, and the majority of my experience within sugarcane. And I've been with this team now for about 3 years. And my role really as the phenotyping lead is really around organizational and team leadership, testing network design and management, operational management, and of course, analytics associated with different systems and processes. So that's essentially me in a nutshell. I'll hand over to Jamlick now to introduce himself as well. Jamlick, over to you.
Thanks, Sanesh, and good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to everyone. As Sanesh have said, I am Jamlick Mwathi, the current testing lead for Sub-Saharan Africa. It's a lot that report to Sanesh. I'm currently based in Kenya, but we are active in 6 countries within the region. And I have 12 years of experience in breeding, multi-environment trials, as well as project management. And for the crop experience, basically experience in rice and maize, currently dealing with maize. And I've been with the Legacy Monsanto Bayer for the last 9 years, joined in through the WEMA project. And my current roles involve testing network management within the region, as well as the resource optimizations across that region, working closely with other functions within the Bayer, and also team management. Yeah, basically that's me, and I'm glad to be here for this event. Thank you, Sanesh.
Thanks a lot, Jamlick. So everybody, now that you know who we are, let's quickly cover look at what we're going to cover for today's seminar. Unfortunately, today we're not going to have enough time to go into any specific details. And so what we will be looking at is some high-level principles of phenotyping rather than the actual practices of phenotyping, if that makes sense. And our objective today is really just to touch on just 3 areas which we feel ties in very nicely with the detailed interactions that we are going to have moving forward in some of the bond one-on-one sessions, as well as the modern breeding project workshops, which are being lined up for the next couple of months. And so the 3 areas that we thought would be interesting are indicated here. We'll start off with a little bit of an overview of the fundamentals of field testing. We'll take a little practical turn thereafter and look at some actual field trial execution aspects and concepts, and then finish off on the importance of data quality management and how that ties into field testing. So let's kick things off looking at some of the fundamentals of field testing. And before I start, I'd just like for us to take a step back a little bit and take a look at the bigger picture with regard to the product testing journey. And as we all know, the product testing journey really does start with breeding, where we start with typically very high product numbers, as indicated here by the blue wedge. And those products are typically exposed to a limited number of environmental conditions earlier on, in some cases only single environments. And as a result, the knowledge and information that we have on those individual products is very limited. But as we move up the breeding pipeline and select more or fewer products, we increase the environmental exposure of those products. And as a result, individual product knowledge increases. And that process increases all the way through to the commercial stages, where we end up with 1 or 2 products which have been exposed to a wide range of environmental conditions. And as a result, we now have enough information or product knowledge to inform our product positioning and recommendations for commercial production. And that, at a high level, is kind of the general sort of model that everybody works with. Now, believe it or not, one of the critical challenges for a modern phenotyping organization is to actually change the shape of this green wedge here. And the idea is to actually increase the thickness of that wedge earlier on. In other words, expose products to a wider range of environmental conditions earlier on, so that we increase the actual product knowledge in the process at earlier stages of the pipeline. We make better advancement decisions, and as a result, we can then reduce the number of products being advanced at a more rapid pace as well. So that's the challenge, and that's one way that you can look at it moving forward. So how do we actually do that? How do we change the shape and increase the environmental, or optimize the environmental exposure? One way of doing that, of course, is to optimize your field testing network. Now, we know that there are a number of factors that influence the optimization of testing networks, and here I've just captured a couple of them for discussion purposes. First and foremost, on the top left-hand side, we see that within field, spatial uniformity is a must for all locations that comprise a particular network. And this is high up on the priority list for site selection. This is something that can be tackled relatively easy, and which, if we pay attention to detail, can really influence our data quality. The second important factor to consider is, of course, our networks and our locations within networks need to be aligned with our target markets. And in that regard, farmer managed networks are preferred, and particularly from a cropping system and management practice perspective. So, for example, do not test under minimum tillage conditions for a target market that is predominantly conventional tillage. That's common sense, essentially. Another important thing to consider, the locations that comprise a particular network need to be representative of the target environment from a yield potential perspective. So what you are looking at here is, for example, 3-year average yields per location of different locations within regional mega environments of a particular testing network. And as you can see, you have yield potential conditions ranging from extremely high to extremely low. And so sampling a wide variation, and this is essential to understand the stability of products that one is testing. Something that's often overlooked, we need to ensure that testing locations are also widely distributed in order to minimize the risks associated with natural disasters. So these include things like drought or flooding, or in this particular case, in this example, hail damage. We tend to cluster our locations for convenience, but we often forget that we're also increasing our risk of location loss because of this. Then, of course, we need to ensure that locations within our testing network are practical and accessible, particularly if using high levels of machinery and equipment. But this is equally as important, if not mechanized as well, because it still affects your efficiency and costs of testing as well. We also need to ensure that locations within the network sample a wide range of biotic stresses so that we can properly characterize our products for their resistances and susceptibilities to these pests and diseases. And then finally, of course, if making use of collaborator relationships or contractors, it's really important that you spend the time and effort in managing those relationships in order to ensure that there is actual data delivery. And this is also something that we often overlook. So, as I mentioned already, there's a whole range of other factors that need to be considered, but these are just a couple that I'd like for you to just keep in the back of your mind as we move forward. So I'd like to change tact a little now and talk about the importance of organizational structures and the importance of different skill levels in phenotyping organizations. The first important point to note is that field testing teams are standalone organizations in their own right. And in each of these global hubs with Bayer, these organizations work very closely with other supporting functions in order to deliver the various pipelines. It's important to also note that these organizations take full ownership of data, from data generation all the way through to handoff to analytics, who will subsequently hand over to breeders for decision-making purposes. And there's also a massive emphasis put on standardization. Standardization of processes, procedures, equipment, and technologies across the entire globe. And this standardization is facilitated by the existence of a center of excellence across the globe. So myself and Jamlick, who are speaking to you today, we form part of the EMEA cluster. And so it's really important to note that the organizational structure is important, as is the autonomy of the phenotyping organization. Another very important thing to note as we move forward is that any modern organization or phenotyping organization has to be truly transdisciplinary, with various levels of leadership and technical knowledge and expertise spanning across the entire organization. We do need the traditional type of expertise in breeding and agronomy, but a whole range of other expertise as well. For example, engineering and data science are becoming more and more important. Electronics and the importance of automation coming into play. So you need people in those areas. Additionally, precision agriculture becoming more and more important, and associated with that, mechanics and of course, safety, which you're going to hear about just now, extremely important. So you need to have individuals in the organization who specialize in that. And of course, you need strong leadership, people who can bring together all of these expertise in order to deliver pipelines more effectively. So I hope you can see that modern phenotyping organizations are extremely diverse, and you really do need strong leadership to be very deliberate about bringing together all of these expertise in order to deliver or enable very strong breeding pipelines. So with that very high level overview to start with, I'm now gonna, we're now gonna change direction and take a little bit more of a practical approach, and I'm gonna hand over to Jamlick to talk a little bit about actual field trial execution and some of the key concepts there. So Jamlick, over to you to carry on.
Yeah, thanks, Sanesh. And I'll be taking you through the field trial execution. As you know, it's encompasses a lot of concepts leading from the lab preparations all the way to site selections all the way to harvesting. But today I'll just delve into trial management. But I think we can cover those other aspects during our later on engagement with the team. And during this time, remember, it's the time that we normally take a lot of our data in the field. So you have to ensure that the trial is of high quality, and the data that you are generating is again of high quality, and the breeder and the breeding program that you can have confidence in to get the when they are making their advancement decision, and with the aim of making sure and advancing the product with confidence that the data generated is of high value. And the goal here is for the, you can move to the next slide, Sanesh. And the goal here is to identify and eliminate all possible variables within your trials, ensuring that the trial are of high quality and the field are as uniform as possible. And you can only do this when you interrogate and scan through your plots on frequent basis, and especially at young stages, so that you can see a broad area encompassing several plots or even a whole site, and quickly identify any issues that you might have within your trials. If you wait for the crop and the trials to be a bit mature, then they tend to mask this problem, but sure, they'll be showing off during the data analysis. And so we discourage people just to getting back on their back case and looking through and say that the crop is good or the trials are good, but rather you need to interact and scan through as you walk through your field to ensure that you take notes of any anomalies that may be arising from those trials. And what we have done is that we have highlighted some of the common issues that you might see when you walk through your trials, and come up with some possible causes for those. and also some of the decisions that we make ourselves when we encounter these scenarios. You can move to the next, Sanesh. And one of it is uneven germinations with uneven emergency within your trials. This is a very common occurrence within trials. And it results because of poor seed and soil contact, inadequate moisture, as well as product fields conditions. And if it's happened, then we avoid taking notes or certain notes on these fields, and especially the seedling vigor, as well as the flowering notes. Sprayer track damage is another common occurrence. If you of your fields, you'll see if you're using the mechanization. And this is again result because of carelessness or inexperienced operators, sometimes because of the gas flow effect. But it's difficult to quantify the effect if the crop recover. But most of the time, it's good for us to go in and do the deactivation of the most affected plots. You can move to the next. And yes, and I have seen a question on the gas flow. This is occurs when you have issue with your GPS on your planter, resulting to wider rows or narrower rows than the normal spacing that you intended to have. And if it happens, then we deactivate the plots with a gas row of plus or minus 15 centimeter from the variance of your intended spacing. For example, if you are planting on 75 centimeter rows, then if it's you have a gas row of that results to 50 centimeter or 90 centimeter, that then need to be deactivated. But anything within those limits, then you can keep it. But again, you have to ensure that you put in place to see whether there is inadequate crop competitions for the adjacent plot, and you can deactivate based on that. But for us, if it happens, then we will have to deactivate the whole ledges that have been affected, and also consider the adjacent plot, as I have said. And to avoid this, then you keep on monitoring when you're planting. You can use this. You can use a tape measure to concentrate, check randomly whether you are changing your intended spacing, and if not, then you need to recalibrate and fix your GPS immediately. Another common issue that we experience on the gaps. These result again because of the challenges with your planter, maybe the seeding units. And if it's happened, then you need to deactivate the plot with a gap of greater than 1.2 meters. And we encourage to go in and hard plant the gaps before the V2 stages. And this is just to salvage the adjacent plot. If not that done, then we will deactivate also the adjacent plot due to competition. The other challenge is on weed control. The rule of thumb is to ensure that your field is clean and from any weeds. As you know, the weeds create variability within your trials, resulting to yellowing of your plots, sometimes stunted growth, as well as the lack of uniformity within your field because of the effect of the weeds. In the season weeds, in the late season weeds, again, they bring a lot of harvest issue, and they might interfere with your accurate moisture readings. and this will result to questionable data in regards to the moisture reading as well as the test weights. And for us, we normally deactivate due to weed pressure if we encounter these scenarios. The other common occurrence is on fertilizer deficiency. Most of the time happen because of the blockage, or sometimes because of the restricted knives on hydrants applicators. And for you to avoid this, then you need to calibrate your fertilizer equipment and ensuring that all the systems are working. And whoever is in the cabin is closely monitoring the fertilizer system to ensure that everything is properly. And if you feel that there is a row that you missed, then you can go in and do spot applications on those rows. But again, you possibly ensure that if this issue persists, then you need to change your application mode and ensure that you are getting everything right on the fertilizer. Podding is also another issue that we encounter, and this results because of intense rainfall on a poorly drained soils, resulting because of poor site selections. And for us to avoid this, then we inspect the field during the off season, and especially after heavy rainfall, to ensure that you are marking those fields that are prone, or those areas within the field that are prone to podding. And if you are to plant in these areas, then we need to avoid mapping plots in the prone podding areas and use beaters instead. Next. Yeah, another common occurrence is on animal damage. This happens because of the plot planted near the bush, which provide the cover for these animals. But care here needs to be taken to differentiate between the animal damage as well as the stock lodging. And if it's happened, then you need to take good notes and make sure that whoever is doing the quality analysis and check is aware of the situations. And most of the time, it's a result to deactivations of the affected plots. Nematode is also another key occurrence within the fields happening on the study soil, resulting to stunted plant and damaged roots. And the damage may vary across the plot level fields. And this is what informs the decision when you're deactivating, whether to abandon the entire rep or the entire locations if it happens. Next. Yeah, and then another challenge is severe weather events, especially that's happened because of strong winds, heavy downpour, or even severe drought. And if it's happened, then you need to determine whether there is value in taking field notes in these fields. And you can get that with the jump pricing differences. If it exists, then we normally advocate for those notes to be taken. And also you need to determine whether your field is harvestable after the R2 stages. And simply because this could impact on the pollinations before that. And then you only collect harvest rate data, you don't collect any other data if you are to harvest the field. The common occurrence is soil variability. And again, this is because of poor site selections. So we normally ensure that we are using the available tool to identify these fields and avoid planting in these fields. And if you were to plant in these fields, some of these fields, then we used to have, we will use pillars or make a better placement within the field to avoid these better known areas that are more severely affected. And this leads to the activation of several plots. And here I have to say that most of our fields are within the farmers' fields, unlike most of your tracks that are within on stations. So yeah, we need to get use of site selection tool to ensure that we are getting the best fields and uniform fields for our tracks. With that, I will hand over to Sanesh to take us through what's happened with our data quality. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jamlick, for that turn down into a little bit of a practical. You touched on some of the practical aspects around the things that we experience with maize breeding. Really valuable stuff there. So the other area that we wanted to cover today was really around data quality, because we feel that this goes hand in hand with field trial execution. And in the next couple of slides, I'll explain to you why that is actually the case. The first important thing to remember here is that there are actually different tiers of data quality management in the context of field trials. And data quality management shouldn't be viewed as a breeder sitting in front of the computer or doing outlier detection in Microsoft Excel at the end of a growing season. That's definitely not the case. In fact, data quality management is something that starts way at the beginning and in the context of field testing in the pre-planting stages. In fact, at the time when you actually receive seed, there's an opportunity at that point to verify that all of the entries are received in their correct quantities as expected. There's also an opportunity to verify that the trials are packaged in the according to the trial randomizations and according to the planting plan. And very often, some kind of trial or packet scanning technology is really useful in that regard, as indicated in that picture on the top right-hand side there. The second tier of data quality management can actually occur at the planting process itself. And so here there are various checks and balances that can be used by utilizing the in-field planter technologies and in-field planter software. So for example, planter software will tell you when you have certain skips. So skips are basically areas where you did not get a particular seed drop, or doubles where you have more than one seed placed in a particular position. And these maps can then be generated automatically and then transferred to your planting or your breeding software, and then some sort of automated quality check can then be run to automatically deactivate plots with major issues. In addition to that, attention to detail by the planter operator is extremely important. So for example, identifying certain shifts in ranges or missing plots. These are things that need to be recorded immediately and made adjustments to the trial plans so that it doesn't have any subsequent knock-on effects. Another tier of data quality management comes in during the early season. We believe this is one of the best times for good data quality management, and we recommend identifying gaps and deactivating plots, as Jamlick mentioned, early, and then not taking further information on those plots if the data quality is not sufficient. So in order to do that, one has to establish certain rules and certain thresholds. So for example, if there are 25% of plants in a particular plot that are missing, then you can have a very hard threshold there to not look at that plot and deactivate it for any further measurements. In addition to that, it's also important to capture the reasons for discarding or deactivating plots. So in this particular example here, in the plants that are circled there, these are plants that are showing uneven emergence. And if this uneven emergence is recorded as the reason for deactivation, and if it repeats itself across multiple replicates or multiple locations, this could point to some sort of an issue with the seed for that particular hybrid, which can then be traced back, and the problem can be rectified before it's being used in any other trials, for example. So it's really important to understand why something was deactivated. And of course, again, something Jamlick has already mentioned, the neighboring plot effect. As an example, on the right-hand side here, we see in a two-row plot, for example, this particular plot in the middle has a row that's missing, so we would deactivate that plot. But in addition, we would deactivate the neighboring plot as well, even though it might be a perfectly healthy plot. And that's purely because of the unfair advantage that that plot has. So the point I'm trying to make here is that there's a high level of attention to detail and precision when it comes to actually choosing which data one will actually use. Another tier of data quality management comes in during the data collection process itself. So here I'm basically referring to the protocols related to the actual data collection process. So having standard operating procedures for how to collect plant height or to do disease ratings is extremely important. Training of field crews is extremely important, making sure that people are well trained, and of course verifying that individuals are able to collect data as per standard operating procedures. These are things that are really important, but we often overlook them and we don't realize that they can have massive impacts on our data quality. Again, as we move into digital tools, another area for data quality management is to make use of the tools themselves to assist us with data quality management. So for example, making use of digital or mobile data collection apps, one can easily just add in certain numeric thresholds so that we can prevent any finger errors creeping in. So really quick and convenient ways of doing that as well. And in keeping with the use of digital tools, one of the most powerful tools that one has is actually digital trial maps. So these are digital trial maps showing spatial variation of certain traits in order for us to identify trends that require deactivation. So for example, in this case shown here, it's clearly obvious that there's some issue in the field there, maybe a farming implement causing damage or a fertilizer applicator which has been blocked, and this has affected the entire column or all plots in that particular column, and those plots therefore need to be deactivated. Now the important thing to note is that trend may not have been picked up in a normal spreadsheet view because these plots would have been distributed throughout the spreadsheet. hence showing how important it is to have this kind of visual appraisal of in-field variability. Really important and powerful tool there. And then, of course, one that there's a lot of excitement about, always interest, is UAV collected traits. Important to note here that the UAV and drone-based workflow in itself has many checks and balances and many QC processes. So there's QC processes that need to occur before and during the flights themselves, post-flights during the image processing period when images need to be stitched, and then of course post-image processing as well. And so the point that I'd like to make here is that digital data captured through UAV is not a trivial process, and it requires a huge amount of resources, especially if one is going to scale this or deploy it at high scales. And we will, at larger scales, we will touch a little bit more on this when we cover them in the Bond one-on-one workshops. And then, of course, finally, you know, at the end of the harvest season, post-harvest multi-trade QC is also really important. We need to ensure that calculated traits like percentages, percentage plots lodged, for example, we need to ensure that these are calculating correctly based on their components. We need to take a visual appraisal to see what's the total percentage of data collected for a particular trial and use that percentage to decide whether we actually need to use that trial, or are we better off just discarding it. We know the age-old concept of you know, no data is better than bad data. And so that's a typical type of example there. And of course, at the very high level, then you've got to step back and look at your entire network as well. So make sure that you have some sort of visuals in place. In this particular example, we're looking at basic yields in box plots to identify outliers. The important thing to note is that in this case, we want to ensure that we have these visuals set up routinely and not, you know, and in an automated manner, and not have to generate these visuals every time you move through a season, for example. And so that brings us to the end. Our intention was really today to touch briefly on those items, and moving forward, we will go into more detail during the Bond one-on-one workshops. We will cover all of those topics again, but also include some of these topics that I have listed here. So we'll touch on mechanization and automation. A big one, testing network optimization, talk a little bit about G by E and location evaluation. How do we understand where to test? How do we understand how many data points that we need? As I mentioned already, we'll also touch a bit about UAV workflows if need be. A big one that's receiving a lot of attention is metadata. How do we go about collecting weather, soil, and management data? And what do you do with that information? And of course, really important as well is as you build up your systems and operations and you're collecting data on your operational efficiencies, how then do you analyze that data and gain further insights into areas of improvement? And so these are just some of the things that we can cover in the workshops moving forward. So that brings me to the end, Amir. I hope we haven't taken up too much time. And so we'll open the floor for questions.
Sure, Sanesh, Jamlick, thank you very much for this presentation and the information. We have a couple of questions here in the chat. And for example, one of them is, how did you determine that 1.2 meters gap requires deactivation?
Jamlick, do you want to take that? So that's
sure. I can take that. Yeah, there is a study that we did with different yield missing in our plots to gauge where we have the cut-and point of the yield that we are going to lose if we were to have. And this is more like four yields. And it had an impact of around 15% of the yield, and that's why you hit the cut point for that. Then it should be less than anything beyond 1.2. Then you have to deactivate that.
Okay. Another question was, what criteria do you use to deactivate or drop trials, not just rows, when the variability they carry represents much more noise than actual genetic signal?
And so there's a number of criteria that we have in place. I mean, we look at typical CVs, we look at percentage data. There's also some metrics that we have in place that focus on across network analytics, which will provide us with an indication whether a particular trial is providing the data that is completely out of sync with what the network is telling you. So there's a network level data quality check as well as the within field data quality check. But typically, I mean, we do make use of CVs and what we call location quality indices that we've developed in-house.
Thanks. There's another question. What is rep replacement?
There should be replacement, not replacement. And here it's when you have those challenges or issues within the field, especially for the soil variability or even the weather. Then you can use that to put buffer instead of planting the reps there or the set there, and then you replace that to another site that is of more uniform than the where this rep was supposed to be originally in the trial.
Yeah, exactly. So that's trial placement basically based on soil homogeneity. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a specific process for site selection? How do you evaluate the risk factors when selecting sites?
Jamlick, I'm sure you can cover that one.
Sure, yeah. We do have several tools that we use when you are selecting the site. As I said, remember most of our sites are within the farmers, so you need to have an elaborate system that is guiding you to get the most uniform field. We are using several tools, and I think we're going to share this much more when during our workshops on some of the tools that you're using. For now, we are using the visual characterizations of the field. Also, you are using the Google Field map to ensure that we get the history of the historical data of the field, and especially also we have tools that are enabling us to see the environmental characterization of these specific fields that we are opting for our trials.
Okay. We still have more time for a couple more. So what are the steps or process to take when you have undulating plot or site?
So we generally try to avoid those. That's probably the best answer. But where it is unavoidable, we do make use of strategic blocking and experimental design. So, your typical randomized block designs or sprint plot or incomplete blocks. So we try to manage in-field variability through experimental design, but I mean, best case scenario, try and avoid undulating. Those are not typically good for trials in any case. So rather avoid.
And what is your rotation time lapse between using the same?
Sorry, I didn't get that one.
Yeah. What is your rotation time lapse between using the same field for research plots, and what measures do you take to maintain the spatial field uniformity over time?
Okay, so the first part of that question deals with the retention of sites. So we try as much as possible to retain our farmer cooperators who've traditionally shown really good yields and low levels of spatial variability. And so year after year, we will go back to those particular farmers. And again, it sounds like the second part of that question is around spatial variation again. And I think we answered that through the experimental design answer given previously.
Yeah, and also to add on what Sanesh said is that if you look at our testing network, we normally get new fields each year because if you feel that there is some problem or trouble with some fields, And on average, we retain to around 72% of our site that are of good quality. And then we, depending on the specific of the season, then we might change 20% also that didn't perform or get our criteria.
Okay, one last question. How do the visuals influence the field design for next trials?
I'm trying to understand the question better, the visuals.
Maybe Claire, you wanted to elaborate
Yeah.
on your question?
Yes, thank you so much. So I wanted to find out, when you do this mapping of the field and you see that there's some variation in the field and for that season, and you intend to use the same field for the next season, would it not influence the trial design for the next?
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely, yes. Sorry, I misunderstood the question. Yes, so you've answered your own question. Absolutely, that's something. That's why we would retain the 70%, as Jamlick has said, and that would influence our next year's placement of our replicates in the field. We know there are areas that are maybe influenced by low-lying areas or low levels of soil fertility. So yes, you're 100% on that.
Okay, then the floor, I guess, is yours, Saheera and Kerry. And our topic now is health, safety, and
Thank you, Amir. So I'm going to try and share my screen and let me know when you can see it.
field trials in Africa.
Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, let's go to slideshow mode. All right.
Okay, great.
All right. So firstly, thank you for the opportunity to talk about a topic that we so often underestimate the value in our organization. So it is mine and Kerry's privilege to be here with you today to discuss health and safety, why the need for a health and safety system, and of course, how we do it in Bayer. So just quickly running through some of the topics that we will cover this afternoon or this morning. So I will cover HSE in Africa and our management system, talking about why do we need safety? Why do we need a management system? What does it bring to our organization? What does it do to our culture? And risk management, just touching base on risk management, how we approach that, and of course, how you can participate in your safety programs. And then Kerry will talk us through the practical implementation, risk mitigation, some best practices in some prescribed topics that we've got from the team. So just quickly an introduction of myself. I am with the company now 13 years at Bayer. I started as the VIMA project coordinator, and I think I've had interactions with some of you on the call. So it's really good to cross paths again many years later. My current role is Africa Strategy and Operations Lead, and I head up the enabling team for the Africa Breeding Organization. This is my family. And my coding, my competencies or coding as we call it, just describing who I am, my favorite things to do. And currently this is my read. I've started it, but being a working mom of 3, it's not so easy to get through a book. And we enjoy traveling across South Africa, you know, and we have a goal to travel to all provinces before we make an international trip. What I'm passionate about is improving lives and developing people and teams. And that's why I'm excited to be here today, so I can share with you what we do in Bayer around safety. So at this stage, I'm going to stop. And Adam, I'd like you to activate the poll, please. Okay, have we got good responses or enough responses coming in?
It's climbing. We're at around 50%, so I'll give it a few more seconds.
Okay, all right. Is everybody seeing my screen okay? Sorry, I'm just seeing a bit blocked, but I think it's because I'm sharing as well. Okay.
That's clear.
Okay, in 3 or 4 more seconds, I'll end the polling.
All right. Wow. So I think most of us know what we need to do here. This is an indication clearly how important certain systems and certain types of organizations are important in what we do. So I think, Adam, in the interest of time, we will keep going and then we can reserve some questions for later. So I see 58% of individuals touched on safety systems, and I'm glad. And 38% of the individuals on the call or the sites on the call have safety as a high priority, and 26 as the highest priority. That's a good place to start. Thank you, Adam. You can close this one. Okay, so creating a safe place to work. What does this mean? Why is it important for us? I think many of you will recognize the value. A safe and healthy work environment, it not only protects us from illnesses, it lowers injury and severity rates, it reduces absenteeism, it's good for business, it's good for people, it's good for people to to feel that they are coming to a place of work that's safe. And if they're feeling that way, they engaged. And of course, most importantly, it is the right thing for us to do to make sure that our employees are taken care of when they're at work and they return to home as they have come to work. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. Safety as an enabler. You heard earlier on, Sanesh was mentioning that safety is a very, very important partner in our breathing pipeline. And he said that you will hear about why. So this is what safety is. Safety is an enabler. It allows us to do what we need to do from the beginning of our process to the end of our process safely, according to legislation, and to be fully compliant. So these aspects that are just listed down here is telling you why. Respect, enough said. Safety will allow us to respect each other, respect our work environment, respect our culture. So that's just about respect. Confidence that management knows what it's doing. That means a support from leadership. A personal safety vision is communicated by the supervisor. It's creating an environment that is welcoming and also where employees feel comfortable. What is important here is that it is a continuous process from beginning to end, and it will be at each part of the process that we engage in terms of our activities, planting, data collection, harvesting, and it's continuous. Seed operations, seed processing, shared operations, very important for us. So as you can see, this picture just depicts that. I thought about something that could stick in your mind when we say why safety is important. And Kerry and I came across this picture, and we tried to map it to exactly what we do here in this organization and in our organizations. It is what we do. Research, agricultural research is what we do. And I thought that this picture was very apt to share with you guys regarding safety. So just to remember, this little farmer guy over here, what is he taking to these plants as he is nurturing them and nourishing them? It's all in this wheelbarrow. It's not just fertilizer, and you need to see safety as that enabler. It is systems, it's people, it's training, it's SOPs, everything that will help these little plants grow from beginning to end safely and well nourished and well taken care of. So just to touch base on the global requirement or the global stance on occupational health and safety and management systems. This is a little snippet from the International Labour Organization and their conference in 2003, that occupational accidents and diseases cause great human loss and suffering. The cost is very high to businesses. It also states that we must change and we must take action. We must make sure that safety is part of what we do. So on the other side, you will just see the journey of OSHAS, and I think many of us are familiar with OSHAS, occupational health and safety practices, and how it has evolved to ISO 45001. ISO 45001, which is an international global standard that also requires going through a process of audits and certification. So this is a global program, and of course it is a global standard, and any site or organization that is affiliated or certified in this regard holds safety in quite a high standard. So why do we need a safety management system? What's important here? And recognizing that a safety management system isn't a formal system or a certification, as I mentioned in the previous slide, or a global standard. It can be an on-site safety program that's been developed by yourself, by industry standards, best practices, codes of good practice in the industry, its legal requirements in the countries that we operate in, what is legally allowed, what do we need to do, and of course, generated by company standards. So, you know, Bayer aspires to be a leader in the health and safety and environment sector, and they have generated quite a bit of standards and directives in this regard. So why do we need a system? It helps organizations minimize the risk of harm to workers. As we said, why safety? We reduce illnesses and injuries. Provide a platform for continuous improvement, keep changing, keep improving, keep doing things differently, doing things safely. Integrate occupational health and safety with your company strategy. So safety culture is part of the organizational culture. This also holds leadership accountable, and you know, important for leadership to be involved and support these programs. The next statement about an organization that has a core value based on health and safety shows commitment from leadership. And I think when we move to the next slide, you'll see what I mean by having a standard in place and what you get out of it. It also allows for legal compliance and completing all your legal obligations. It improves productivity, creating, as I said, you know, people feel safe. They want to work in that environment, and also fostering a safety culture development, where the employees take ownership and accountability and feel like they own the process. So this little picture that you see there is the team having a vehicle safety pause, you know, just having some fun with it, but also participating and learning and showing their commitment towards vehicle safety. This is a team, and Sanesh, these are team members from Sanesh's team, so I try to find a picture. You know, they drive doing the trials. They do quite a bit of driving, high mileage driving, and that's a risk for them. So how do we mitigate that risk? What part does HS&E, health, safety, and environment, play there? How do we get the teams engaged to make sure they're thinking about their safety when they're on the road? So this was just an initiative there. And then just talking about Bayer's management to safety and how do we approach it? What is our commitment? What is our stance? As I mentioned, ISO 45001 in the previous slides, we are an organization that is currently being certified in ISO 45001. It is a transition for all our sites. We in South Africa have transitioned. We have been through the audit. And why do we do this? We were previously OSHA certified, so the natural progression would be to move over to ISO. But important to note here, what ISO means to us. Why do we use it? It provides us with a strong management of our continuous improvement process and continuous improvement in health, safety, and environment. Most importantly, it allows us to reduce the risk exposure for our people in a structured and a controlled way. We've also got a process where we've got people working in the different areas that have taken ownership for their areas. ISO is also in line with the global reporting initiatives. There's global reporting for statistics on a yearly basis, on a quarterly basis that we need to submit. ISO is also aligned to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I think we all know about SDGs, and we've provided we've made room in our strategies to be able to be aligned and make a difference in our continent. Leadership, commitment, and worker participation. This is an entirely new clause that was new for us when we transitioned, and we had to prove that our leaders in Bayer are committed and are supportive of the safety program. So they were all involved in the audit that took place. And as you see, Sanesh mentioned in his slide, safety being an enabler and a very important part of our process. As a leader in our organization, he needed to show his leadership and commitment for this aspect. Safety is also part of our corporate strategy. We have goals that are cascaded through the organization that we need to measure ourselves against on a yearly basis. It creates an improved safety culture. Again, ownership, people feel safe, they support, and there's buy-in. And of course, ISO is very process-driven, not so much procedure or SOP, but process, making it practical, making it something that's on the ground that people can implement and support and easily do. Just talking a little bit about our journey and how we got there. So we are, as mentioned, we are Africa Breeding. In South Africa, we have 3 sites, 3 locations. You will see them listed here. And we've been through a process in the last 18 months or so. So initially we had 2 sites under 1 certification. And then we had a change in our target operating model in January 2020, but also I think we started the process around 2019. So we had to bring on board our 3rd site, seed processing site Malalan, and we had to go through a rigorous process of aligning the sites in terms of practices, in terms of JSAs, in terms of a management system, looking at the procedures that apply. So it was a total kind of overhaul of the system to ensure that we have 1 certificate for all 3 sites and 1 management system. It is a continuous process. In that time, we also had an added complexity of Bayer requirements with the legacy Monsanto and Bayer post-merger integration. So we had to take into consideration Bayer requirements, and are they allowed for our current procedures, or do we need to update our procedures? So we've been through quite a rigorous process in the last couple of months. We've come out on the other side ISO 45001 compliant, which we passed in October 2020, and we continue to maintain that across the sites. And at the end of May, we also went through the corporate audit for Bayer 2055 requirements, and we've come out on the other side with a few findings that we need to fix and put in place in order to be compliant with our company requirements. So basically, what's important is that we comply with company standards and requirements. We comply with an international standard requirement, upholding our very high standard of safety practices and our commitment to making Bayer a safe place to work. And then I just want to touch base on how we do things regarding risk management. So I'm hoping that this is not the first time some of you are seeing this diagram. The approach that we've taken, to eliminate any risks and hazards, to reduce them, we use the hierarchy of controls. And as it mentions down here, PPE is your last hierarchy of control, and it is the least effective. You've got to start on the top where you try to eliminate the hazard. You have a substitution, or you put in some engineering controls or some admin controls, and there are various examples of each one of them. And of course, your last resort is PPE. What I want to share with you here on this slide or leave with you is that it's very important to identify what your risks are in your organization or in the work that you do. And once you know what those risks are, it then becomes a lot easier for you to use your tools, your SOPs, to be able to eliminate those risks and hazards. And I think later on you will hear Kerry talking about JSA, job safety analysis, and some of those tools that you will utilize in identifying risks, or how do we mitigate those risks. And then just also important to note, and why we do this, and what also contributes to the success of managing our safety system, is that we track both lagging and leading indicators. It is important to note a leading indicator is showing your proaction, or how an organization is taking a proactive approach to safety. It helps us prevent workplace injuries and illnesses, reduces costs, versus a lagging indicator is more what happened in the past. You know, how many injuries have we had? How many recordable injuries? How many lost work days? So this triangle is our Bible, and it's our go-to. It's a triangle that we show in every safety meeting, every leadership meeting, any meeting that we're talking about safety. It's important that this diagram is showed. It's kind of ingrained in our team that this is what we want to have. We do not want to see a skewed triangle. We want to see a base of hazard recognition being high. We want to see the near misses being high, and we want to see the first aids and the recordables being less. Hazard recognition and near misses are leading indicators. We want to see people reporting that. And our first aids and recordables are lagging indicators which are recorded. And we do quite a bit of trend analysis on that to indicate and look at our performance. And obviously we have targets that are set on a yearly basis, but we want to see them being less. We don't want to see them being high, and we do not want to see a skewed triangle here. So this for me is very, very important. And there's very high reliance on our teams and their buy-in and support of safety to make this program a success, because it is the teams that report the hazards. It is the teams, while doing their work, will report any near miss, and we rely on that data. And what is good to know here, some best practice that we have in place currently, is that we have gone digital in this arena. We've got an app that we have shared with the teams, that has been developed in-house so that people can report using an app any hazard recognition or any observation. And that has proved to be very useful in hazard recognition or reporting of observations, and we see an increase in the numbers. So my last slide before I hand over to Kerry, and what I want to leave you with, is how do I get involved? What's the participation and consultation that I can bring to this program? How can I improve the safety on my site, in my team, in my organization? And how do I foster that safety culture? So these are just some examples that allow for team members to be involved. The periodic review of site risk assessments, and that's therefore I'm saying, identify your risks, look at them. And of course, there are tools in place to use that will help you conduct a risk assessment. It will help you identify those risks. Job safety analysis processes. I know that some of you have heard of this before, and I know that you have some SOPs that currently exist. How do I get involved in that process? I make sure that I've identified all the steps that are required to do that task. I'm working with my safety coordinator, or I'm working with my team to make sure that we've covered all the steps. With the steps, we've identified the hazards and risks, and we've also identified control measures, very important. Hse reviews and implementation. Now, this is just something that Bayer has in place. When we purchase, or prior to purchasing equipment, we have a process that we need to follow, and our capital purchases and equipment will only be approved if we have this process in place, that we've taken a deep dive and looked at our equipment and what risks it will possess before we purchase it, and so that we may be able to mitigate it. What you can do, housekeeping inspections, and Kerry will touch on housekeeping in her presentation as well. Any behavior-based safety programs that you may have on site, any specific site safety programs, trainings, safety meetings. I know Alec was mentioning that he does have some safety meetings with his teams. Participation is important. Have an input, show representation, filter that message through to the rest of your teams. And any company safety day, any pause, a compliance day, off-the-job efforts and campaigns. What are we doing in our communities? Do we want to share? Do we want to talk about, topics like, and we've done it in the past, road safety, vehicle safety? What are those safety topics, fire safety, that we can share with our communities and extend just beyond, our workplace? So these are just some ways that you can get involved, learn, and of course, put in place, implement, and continually improve in. And with that, I am going to take a pause there. I don't know if there are any questions, but we can take that later, and hand over through to Kerry. And of course, as Sanesh mentioned earlier, we look forward to the bond sessions. This was very high level. And if there are any other questions, we look forward to taking that in the bond session and having a workshop with specific teams that require some support. Kerry, over to you.
Thank you very much, Saheera, and good afternoon to everybody on the call. So I'm just going to give you an update on HSE, which is Health, Safety, Environment. So you see our slogan there, your safety, our passion. That is something that we have adopted within breeding. And the reason why is because we really do care about the safety of all our employees working for us. We can go to the next slide, please, Saheera. So just a brief introduction of myself. So I'm the breeding, health, safety, and environmental specialist. I've been working for the company for 18 years, starting off as an admin assistant, but also with HS&E responsibilities, and it's pretty much been safety first for me throughout my entire career working for Bayer and Legacy Monsanto. There is a photo of my family and my competencies, and in my free time, my hobbies are cake decorating, and I also make flowers out of sugar paste as well. So those are the things that I do in my free time. And then what am I passionate about? I'm passionate about what I do. I really enjoy what I do. And I'm passionate about keeping people safe and well, which makes my job easy. And next slide, please, Saheera. So today we're just going to look at some hazards and risks surrounding agriculture. And agriculture is known to be one of the most hazardous industries, where farmers and farm workers are exposed to many hazards and risks. And there are also quite a number of injuries and fatalities that are being reported within the agricultural industries. And some of those hazards are surrounding equipment, where we look at operation of tractors and combines, and hooking of implements that are also being used along with the tractors and the agricultural equipment. The vehicles, sometimes the roads that are driven on are gravel roads, they're in poor conditions, but also sometimes they tend to have to drive long distances as well. Then looking at chemicals, so the handling and mixing of chemicals, application of those chemicals, and being exposed to the hazards and risks associated with the handling and spraying and application of chemicals. And in our fields where we have both equipment and manual operations, we look at ergonomics, we look at heat stress, we look at trip hazards. We also have other hazards such as snakes and insects that we have to deal with in our field. And in order for us to reduce incidents and injuries, we need to look at the hazards and the risks associated with operations. And then we look at ways and methods to control those hazards and risks. And some of those methods are to look at checklists, to make sure that our equipment and our operations are in good order, and also maintenance, to have maintenance plans for all our equipment. We look at PPEs. It's a personal protective equipment that our employees need to wear and to be issued with. And also, like what Saheera said, those hierarchy of controls, such as the engineering controls that we can put in place, such as guarding of maybe moving parts on equipment. You can go to the next slide, please, Saheera. So we try to have a practical approach to safety. So we need to enable our teams to get their work done. They have a lot to achieve, and we need to help them to achieve that, but at the same time to help them to do it safely. So we work together to find those ways of helping them to work safely. You can go to the next slide. Thanks, Saheera. So just a few topics that we're going to cover today is storage of chemicals and chemical safety, equipment safety, pest control and spraying, as well as the field operations related to the field operations safety, how we mitigate those risks to create a safe place to work, and also having that positive safety culture within our breeding organization. You can go to the next slide, where we're going to have a look at the storage of chemicals and chemical safety, and just a few best practices which also align to legislation. So we need to ensure that our chemicals are being stored, that they are stored to ensure that they are incompatible. Sorry, let me start over. We need to ensure that that the chemicals that are being stored are incompatible chemicals that do not mix. So we need to refer to a material safety data sheet where we get all of this information from. It will explain whether or not chemicals can be stored together. We need to ensure that liquid chemicals are stored above solids to avoid contamination or any kind of reactivity. Also, all corrosive chemicals need to be stored in a spill tray. And we also need to make sure that if we're storing chemicals, we don't overload the shelving. And normally we obtain load limits from suppliers of shelving. And then also to ensure that we are locking these chemicals away to prevent unauthorized access. We also do not allow chemicals to be stored in areas where there are possible ignition sources. And adequate ventilation is always necessary wherever chemicals are being stored. We also need to have copies of the material safety data sheets in the chemical storage area. You know, if there's an emergency and first aid needs to be provided, we also need to know what the first aid measures are that need to be followed. And all of that information is available on that MSDS. It needs to be easily accessible. And then we should have a containment area in place. And it should be 10% of the volume of the container or the volume of the largest container, whichever one is greater. And have a spill kit handy in the area where we're mixing or applying chemicals, so that if there is a spill, it can be contained very quickly. We don't want chemicals to be running into underground water sources, etc. So here we can go to the next slide. So I've just got a few examples of our best practices surrounding chemicals. So the first photo on the left is the emergency drill for chemical exposure, which was conducted at the Rietgat site. That's where the testing hub is. And so this was outside the chemical store area, and you can see that they actually really did a practical drill and made sure that the chemical shower is working. The emergency shower at Malalan is the second photo, and it must be tested and checked every month. We need to make sure that it's checked. We don't want to have an emergency and somebody needs to try and use that shower, and then it's maybe not working, or the water supply is not sufficient. And then also all flammable chemicals need to be stored in a specific or a specified flammable cabinet. And it needs to be on a containment or area that in case of a spill. So there's a photo at the bottom of, it's like a pallet type containment. And these photos were taken in Malalan, and we just received a new flammable chemical storage a cabinet for the team there. We can go on to the next slide, please, Saheera. So then when we look at machine safety for field equipment and processing equipment, we must always make sure that employees are authorized to operate the equipment and that they're also trained. We need to know what the hazards are associated with the equipment that they are operating. We need to check the farm equipment prior to use to pick up if there's any thing that needs to be fixed or anything that is unsafe. We need to make sure that equipment is well guarded. And there's an example of guarding just at the bottom. So any moving parts on any equipment, whether it be field equipment or processing equipment, should be guarded to prevent injury. Also with our PTOs, which is a power turnover or a power takeover, we need to make sure that it is in good condition and that the cover is in good condition as well. We have monthly checks in place for our PTOs and our guarding to ensure that it is well maintained and safe to use. So then keep away from farm equipment while in operation. We don't want any bystanders in the field when we are busy operating equipment such as tractors or combines. And anybody that is working with agricultural equipment or approaching the area should also have safety shoes on. When driving any tractor or combine or vehicle in the fields, we need to make sure that our teams are wearing their safety belts. And also, we have a system which we call Lockout Tag Out. So if anybody's going to leave a vehicle, a tractor, a combine, they need to switch the engine off, they need to put the parking brake on, and they need to remove the key and take it with them. That is to prevent unauthorized startup, maybe by another employee, especially if somebody is performing maintenance on that equipment, that could really cause a severe incident. And so that is why we have our Lockout Tag Out procedures in place. We talk a little bit about what Saheera was referring to as our JSA, which we call a job safety analysis, but basically it is a safe operating procedure which we develop for all our equipment and all tasks being performed. So it's the step-by-step process or procedure of exactly how work is to be performed. And while we are developing those SOPs, we identify the hazards and risks associated with that equipment and with each step. And then we look at what the precautionary measures are that need to be taken to reduce or to mitigate or eliminate the risk totally. And those can be PPEs, it can be engineering controls, training, and so forth. So we can go to the next slide, Saheera. So when we look at chemical application, we need to look at the label or the MSDS, the safety data sheet for the chemical that is going to be applied or sprayed. And we need to identify what personal protective equipment is required by the employees that are going to be either mixing or spraying those chemicals, and we need to provide those PPEs for all of the employees. They are then trained on the MSDS. Those are the hazards associated with that chemical and with spraying or applying the chemical, so they know what to do and what to be looking out for. Then also, we need to make sure that they understand that equipment and PPEs need to be washed and decontaminated. All the PPEs that are being used need to be disposed of safely. So we spend time training them on that as well. And also our backpacks, they also need to be in good condition. And there needs to be no leaks. And the way that we do this is to have monthly checklists in place for all our spraying equipment. The bottom left photo is of the petite team that went out and performed spraying in the field. So those coveralls that they have on the white coveralls, they are impervious, so that prevents the chemicals from getting through. And so they are quite well protected there with all their PPEs on. We can go on to the next slide, Saheera. So then when we look at field safety, there's quite a few risks associated with field safety, but those that we're going to look at today are heat stress, So we need to make sure that we provide fresh and sufficient drinking water for all our employees that are working in the field, as well as regular breaks. And when we have heat that we're working with, especially at sites such as the Malalan site, we start the workday early and we break during the heat of the day. We also allow the team to take more regular breaks. We've also placed some containers in the field so that they can access water regularly in the fields as well. Irrigation safety is something that's also really important. We need to ensure that all our irrigation equipment is in good condition. There was an incident a couple of years back where some students were working in the fields in the US, and they happened to touch some of the irrigation, the metal parts of irrigation equipment, and it was not grounded, and two of those students were electrocuted. So we have, prior to season, checks that are conducted at all of our sites, as well as at the growers or the farmers where we plant our irrigation trials, and we get certificates of compliance for all of the equipment, or all of the irrigation equipment, to ensure that anybody working in those fields is not exposed and it's safe. And we also keep a safe distance of 6 meters away from any metal irrigation parts. We also have quite a few hazards associated with snakes and insects because of the type of work. So we provide insect repellent for all our employees. We also train them not to wear any bright colored clothing, and also awareness on what to do in case of a snake sighting. We need to have emergency plans in place. We have some trained snake handlers on site. We don't kill any snakes. We have them removed safely and relocated. Then when you look at the different kinds of crops, such as maize, we can sustain eye injuries, and so all employees that are working in maize fields, they need to wear safety glasses. Also slips, trips and falls, so we can have wet fields, we can have drip lines or irrigation pipes that are in the field that can cause trip hazards, and also in fields is naturally uneven ground that we are exposed to. So we are constantly creating awareness surrounding these types of hazards in the field. And also ergonomics, and also it also depends on what work is being performed or what crop you're working on. So we rotate our employees who are performing repetitive tasks, or those that are having to bend for long periods of time. So there's different tasks that take place in the field, so we will rotate those employees to reduce the ergonomic risk that they are exposed to. That's just a couple of points that I think were important to be sharing with you, and just to highlight. So now I'm going to open up to the team that is on the call, and we have some housekeeping concerns on this slide, and so I'd like you to respond by letting me know what do you think is wrong with what you see, the photos that you see on these slides. You can maybe respond verbally or by chat.
So guys, please feel free to unmute, and if you'd like to reply to Kerry's question, go ahead, please.
Correct. So there's a chat, a potential mixture of chemicals. That's correct. So we don't know what the compatibility is of some of the chemicals. In the first photo on the left-hand side, we have liquid chemicals as well as granular bags of chemicals. And we know that we should be storing any granular type of chemical away from any liquid chemicals. The containers are damaged, yes, and there is a leak on the floor. So our best practice that we've implemented is that once we've emptied any chemical container, we triple rinse them and we drill holes in them. That prevents anybody from trying to take those containers and make use of them for some other type of activity, and then we normally give them back to the supplier and they are recycled. There's spillage on the floor, that's correct. There's a question in the chat as well, which I can maybe address at the same time, and that is, do employees that are using chemicals go for medical checks? Yes, they do. Also need to ensure that they are fit to wear respirators. There's specific medicals that are, or blood tests that are done depending on the type of chemical that they are making use of. Yes, so that there's a potential of harboring rodents amongst the boxes that are not stored well on the top middle photo, and you'll see also, that's a place that a snake could hide, and obviously rodents go in there, it attracts the snakes, and then you have the potential for a snake bite. And also something that is important is that, if you have good housekeeping, your risks are immediately reduced. The risk of incidents are reduced. And also first impressions count. If you've got a well-organized workplace, it just gives employees that idea that we really care about them and we care about a safe place for them to work in. The top right photo, so we've got chemical there, chemical treatment in a bucket. We've got a bottle of cold drink. We've got a PPE, and all of that is just not the correct storage way to store. I mean, you could have your PPE that is contaminated with a chemical, and then the person, when the employee puts it on, then they are exposed to that residue, chemical residue. There's a question in the chat, and I don't know, Amir, if I should answer them. I'm not too sure how much time we have left.
We still have like 5 minutes for Q&A. So would you like me to read some of the questions?
Yes, we can do that. And Saheera, I think there were some questions for you too. I don't know, Amir, if you want to address them at the same time.
Sure. Let's start. So,
Amir, this is our last slide. So I think that does take us into the Q&A. Okay,
great. So what do you see as the biggest challenge organizations in Africa face in adopting HSE practices? Is it cultural, legal, regulatory? What are your views on this?
So I think there's a couple, we need to really try and help employees understand why we have safety practices in place. At the end of the day, when we want to make sure that we can allow our employees that are coming to work to go home safely to their families in the same way that they came to work in the morning, we are obliged to comply with legal legislation, and we need to communicate those requirements to employees, let them understand, we are doing this because this is required by law, and let them understand what the incidents are that could happen if we don't implement safety practices. We share incidences from other sites, and I think that gives a good indication of why we do what we do, why we have management systems in place, how we control hazards and risks, why we have safe operating procedures.
Okay, what methods should one employ to activate, maintain, and make almost all staff, if not all, to comply to HSE?
So there's various ways that we try and encourage them to participate. So we have safety meetings to which all employees are invited. we have training programs, and we identify based on the type of work that employees are performing what training is required. It's only specific for the type of work that they are performing. So for instance, somebody that is working with chemicals will need to be trained in a worker protection program. They also need to be trained in the safe operating procedures, and also in maybe in the maintenance of equipment if employees are operating equipment.
And how often do you think that the safety talks or meetings should be arranged between the operators and the management?
Okay,
So
we
I
have.
can take that one.
Yeah,
Kerry.
go ahead, Saheera.
So I think, just, with reference to the previous questions as well, in terms of fostering a safety culture, it starts with employee buy-in, right? And as much as we have the compliance part of it, we also need the commitment. So compliance would be those things that Kerry mentioned in terms of the training, having people equipped to do what they need to do, understanding their task. But commitment is something that will grow over time. And often you will find that you will have a small percentage that will support. And it's important to use that percentage to influence the rest of the organization. And back to this question, having leadership support and leadership show up in your safety meetings, in your audits, it shows a commitment, and that's how we get, we've been able to improve our buy-in and our commitment to safety and our culture. We've had tremendous support. The success that I mentioned earlier in terms of the audits, that's not just mine and Kerry's, it's a team success. We had a whole lot of people behind us that sat through with us, our site leads included, our process owners included, to sit through those questions, and the auditors were quite impressed that it's the first time we had site leadership involved in a corporate audit. So it's a process. It takes time, but it's important to not disregard the people aspect of your program. So while you develop your safety program, it's not just about the compliance and the training and those tasks. It's not just task orientated. You need to have a people aspect and make it people orientated, to a good balance of that.
Okay, that's great. Since we're, our time is past due, so I would like to thank Bayer team, Sanesh, Jamlick, and Kerry and Saheera for their contributions today. We look forward to seeing you guys in our next webinar, and God bless. See you soon.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity.